Assalamu warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to Thirsty Soul. Today I'd like to talk to you about an issue that is very dear to my heart, which is mental illness, mental distress, however you would like to call it. I got inspired to make this video because last week a dear friend of mine told me about a really good conference that the Islamic Online University was doing for 3 days, talking about the issues about mental illness in the Muslim community, giving Muslims information about mental illness and the unique issues that we face in the Muslim world, and as Muslims in battling mental ill health. This issue is very, very dear to my heart. I currently work in a mental health facility. I speak to people who are going through that, 4 days a week. I studied psychology. I plan to, inshallah, do a PhD in clinical psychology. So this is an issue that is very, very close to me, and I think at least I can say that I do have a bit of knowledge on this issue that I hope that I can share with you guys today, and also maybe raise some questions that you might have in your head about these issues. I would like to focus on firstly the Muslim experience of it, and then later on talk about black and ethnic minorities' experience of mental health. So getting right into it, one really key thing that came up in that conference is the issue of stigma, and that mental health is stigmatized, point blank. But especially the Muslim communities, that people would rather say that they have been possessed by jinn or something of that sort, rather than say that they're going through a mental health problem, rather than going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, etc. Because there is this belief that as Muslims we shouldn't, if you're a good Muslim and you do everything right, we're not going to experience any mental health problems. And Dr. Bilal Phillips was saying that maybe only 1% of people actually have a mental health problem. 1% of people actually have a jinn possession problem. Most of the time, that is not the case. And as Muslims, of course, we do believe in jinn possession. But even if you want to go and do a ruqya, which is a kind of exorcism, go and do that. But it doesn't mean don't also seek professional help. You can tick that box and say, okay, this is not the issue, let's move on to other things. So there seems to be this underlying conflict, as if it's either jinn possession or it's a mental health issue, And as Muslims, if you're a good Muslim, you're not going to go through depression, you're not going to go through anxiety because, you believe in Allah and you shouldn't have any of these problems. When it's the complete opposite, as Muslims, Allah says, do you think you will believe and we will not test you? Allah never says if you believe it, you're not going to go through trials. That's the whole point of this, to go through the trials. And if you look at the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, you see that he went through so much, and Allah uses the Quran to constantly comfort him all the time. There was this year in the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ called the Year of Sorrow, where his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, of 25 years died, where his uncle Abdul Muttalib died, where his son died, where he went to go and give dawah to these people in Taif, and they threw stones at him and treated him horribly. And he was going through a lot, and the companions would see him cry and see him really upset. This is the person who was one of the most beloved to God, and he was going through all this. Who do we think we are that we're not going to go through episodes in our lives, And if you look at the Quran, again, if you look at Surah Al-Duha, Allah says to you, we found you when you were poor, we found you an orphan, did we not give you guidance, did we not give you this, did we not give you that? Allah constantly uses the Quran as a reminder, to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that, don't despair, don't be sad, I've got your back, don't worry, because it was really difficult. I think there was a time where the Muslims were boycotted from Mecca, and it was hard for them to get food, they were treated horribly, it was hard for them to get basic human needs, but a lot of them were rich and they were fine, and now they were going through all this stuff. And Allah even says to the Prophet in Surah Al-Qalam, he says, you are not mad, you are not possessed. Allah is actually explicitly saying, you're going through all these things and you're so stressed, and all these non-Muslims are making fun of you that, oh, he's just crazy about his this, and Allah is comforting him. No, you're not crazy, don't worry, they're crazy, but you're not crazy, It's okay, I've got your back, I'll look after you, remember Jannah, remember this, this is the best human being that we believe ever lived as Muslims. So what makes us think that we're not going to also go through trials? I think that's a really important thing there, look at when you're going through these moments, looking at the Quran, you can see the times the Prophet Muhammad struggled. So we should use that as a reminder to ourselves that, in life we're going to go through these periods. And I always say, maybe we just haven't been pushed to our limit yet. Everybody has a threshold. And I think sometimes you've just never been pushed out of that threshold, so never, judge somebody. Maybe they've just reached their threshold. And also in the black and ethnic minority communities, Asian, Latino, Indian, etc. I think that's another huge stigma, because even when I wanted to study psychology, a lot of people in my family were like, why do you want to study psychology? Why do you want to help mad people? Like, why? And it really started making me research, like, in Africa, do we have a mental health issue, or do people not have mental health issues? And one thing that caught my eye before I even say the issues that we face in the African communities is that in a lot of these communities, people live in communal, collectivist cultures. People live in cultures where everybody knows each other, everybody helps each other, you have the role of the extended family. So that does protect people against a lot of mental ill health. Because you have a lot of support that we don't have in the Western world. In the Western world, a lot of people are alone and have to go to professionals to do jobs that in these countries, you will just have an auntie, an uncle, etc. And also people have the role of traditional healers and things. So I think that does change the dynamic of things. And also, if you look at the Western world, the rate of depression, etc. is so high now. But before, like in Britain, for example, people used to live in collective communities. People, before the Industrial Revolution, most people lived in villages and little towns. So that helped people a lot. And slowly people moved away from villages and towns, moved into industrialized areas, started living by themselves. They didn't have the support. So the state had to start providing that support for people. So I think that's a really key cultural difference that we have that will change the types of mental health issues that people face in African countries compared to the Western world. And when you actually look at a lot of African countries, a lot of people face mental health issues, but they go to churches, they go to mosques, they go to traditional healers. If you look at a lot of African churches that claim to, some of them, the evangelical ones that claim to heal the blind or a lot of it is, that is who people will go to when they have these problems. They're not going to go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so therefore it's seen differently. It's seen in a different way than it is in the Western world. It's seen more as a spiritual problem, rather than a mental, emotional problem that can be fixed by Western medicine. And I think madness also is very stigmatized. I remember growing up in Nigeria, people, you just see a mad woman on the street and it was just normal. No one would feel sorry for her, no one would do anything. And that is what people think mental health issues are. Every time I say no, there's depression, there's anxiety, there's OCD, there's so many non-psychotic, mental health issues. You don't have to be running around the street naked to have a mental health issue. And I think that's something that people find very, very difficult to understand. How can you just be sad? But what's wrong with you? Can't you just pick up? Can't you just do this? And again, it made me wonder, okay, so how do people deal with sadness and etc. in the African world? And what you tend to find is that, I think in a lot of African communities, people are not really encouraged to be very emotional and very emotional and out there with their feelings and crying. You're supposed to be strong. Even as a woman, you're supposed to be strong and resilient. And, my brother said to me once, he said, in Nigeria, we don't have a word for, so in my language, so in Yoruba, we don't have a word for love. Like, we have a like, but we don't really have a different word for like and love. You know, I feel like English is a bit more of an emotional, evocative language than Yoruba. So if people don't even have these words to express in the language, that shows that that culture is not really, that is not promoted in that culture as much as it might be promoted in other cultures to express your emotions openly. So therefore, actually, what I found was that suicide rates in Nigeria is actually going up. A lot of people are committing suicide, especially with this economic crisis that is going on in Nigeria. A lot of people, you know, when things are just not working out, they don't find a way out, they're in all these debts, etc. They would rather commit suicide because there is this huge stigma and shame to seeking help and asking for help and being distressed, that people would rather just escape it altogether, which is really, really sad. And I think more of us Africans, we really need to be aware that people are going through this. They're not just, but it's just not talked about in our communities. I remember once someone told me about how someone she knew committed suicide, and she was just so blasé about it. It was like, yeah, he committed suicide. I said, why? I said, oh well, he failed his exams and he didn't want to tell his parents. You know, he was so scared of his parents that he killed himself. You know, he couldn't just be vulnerable. You know, and I think that does go to a shame of our communities, because on one hand we live in collectivist communities that people are more supportive of each other in African and Asian cultures, but on the other hand it can lead to a huge amount of shame that people experience when things don't go right. I was reading once that in India some farmers killed themselves because they were in so much debt and their crops were, I think we were going through famine and the crops weren't growing. You know, it's like, if it doesn't work out, let's kill ourselves. You know, honour and shame and all these terminologies start coming into place. People don't know how to just express themselves, how to talk about their emotions, how to just say, yes, I'm struggling, I'm vulnerable, I don't know what to do, you know, help me, I'm feeling depressed. Something that we just don't talk about in a lot of Muslim and black and ethnic minority communities. And another point I wanted to raise is that, you know, living in the UK, for instance, or living in the Western world as someone who is a person of colour, in itself could bring a lot of mental health issues, because we're in a society where you're a minority, where you are very likely to get discriminated against, where actually you're more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act in the UK. A black person, I think, is like 3-4 times more likely, because of the connotations of a black person being mad, being animalistic. You know, people have all these subconscious biases. So therefore, living in a society where you're going to face all these issues, you know, if you don't know how to deal with it in a healthy way, it can be very, very challenging for a lot of people. And a lot of the times you find that in the statistics, more black people suffer from mental health issues in the Western world than in their actual countries, because of, I think, the unique issues they face living in a society that might not want them. So we really, really have to put all these things in mind and be more compassionate, I think, and empathetic towards people who have problems. For anyone out there who's listening to me now who has a mental health issue, I would like to say to you, there is definitely hope, you know, but the first step is seeking professional help. But there is definitely hope. I've seen it time and time again at work where people do get through it, you know. So anyways, I would like to end there today. Thank you so much for listening to me. Please comment, tell me your opinions about mental health. Tell me about the stigma, the issues, your opinions about mental health issues. Maybe something that is really important that I haven't mentioned. And please subscribe and continue watching Thirsty Soul. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.